Hello everybody, thanks for joining your math coach today for the Kindergarten Math Unit 3 Just-in-Time training. I hope that you find the topics in this training helpful as you begin planning your math instruction for Unit 3. In Unit 3, the expectation is that kindergartners will extend the counting sequence to 100. KCC 2 specifically says that kindergartners can count forward beginning from any given number within the sequence. So instead of beginning at 1, they might start at 37 and count on 38, 39, 40, and so on. There are many good games and activities that you can engage students in to get them to identify the next number in the counting sequence. For instance, here's an activity called Number After Bingo. This one is found on illustrativemathematics.org. Activities like this one engage students in identifying the next number in the counting sequence by focusing on the number after any given number. Another practical way to get students to practice this skill would be to interrupt them during counting collections. Ask them, how many of you counted so far? And once they're able to respond to that question, say, okay, good job, keep counting. This will give them the opportunity to practice counting on from any given number within the sequence. In Unit 3, KMBT 1 focuses on developing an understanding of the teen numbers 13, 14, and 15. While it may be frustrating, students who count 10-1, 10-2, 10-3, or say 3-teen, 14, 15, these students are actually showing an understanding of the structure of our number system. And this might be helpful in developing the actual understanding of the meaning and composition of these numbers. It's okay if students come to relate these numbers with more than one name, just like mommy and mother. One is more of a formal name than another, but the other shows more meaning and understanding. Don't be afraid to hold classroom conversations or small group discussions around these interesting and funny ways for counting through the teen numbers, because it may help develop an understanding of the composition of these numbers to discuss these ways to name them. Remember, another way to develop understanding of these numbers is to use them as the total in a story problem, where you're working with a group of 10 and some more are added, or you're working with a group of teen number and some are subtracted to make a group of 10. This is really going to develop a good place value understanding. You can also use the teen numbers in multiple grouping problems where you're talking about there are 3 groups of 13 or 3 groups or 4 groups of 14, etc. So students can begin to decompose those numbers to solve problems. For example, a student who solves this problem by somehow notating that each box has 10 and 3 more in it is showing a deep understanding of the composition of 13 as a 10 and 3 ones. In Unit 3, KOA 2 is focusing on put together, take apart, total unknown problems, and both add-in unknown problems. Let's take a look at the table on page 2 of this document to remember what these problem types look like. Put together, take apart problems and both add-in unknown problems can be found here on your problem type table. The put together, take apart problems are slightly different from the add to result unknown problems, even though their number sentence is the same. Let's take a look at a few examples of these problem types to differentiate between them. 2 of these problems are put together, take apart problems, and 1 is an add to result unknown. Take a minute and compare these problems to the problems on your table and see if you can identify which is which. The difference between these 2 problem types is the action. These first 2 problems do not have an action, and the last problem here does. There were 4 girls and 5 more came to play with them, But in the first two, there were 3 chocolate chip cookies and 4 peanut butter cookies. There were just some different kinds of cookies. None came or went away. And in the second one, there were some Earth Skylanders and some Water Skylanders, but they were just there. They existed together. There was no action. The first 2 problems here in these examples are put together take-apart problems with no action. The third problem here is a join or add to result unknown problem, the type with the action. Again, in Unit 3, we should be moving on to more difficult problem types, such as the first 2 that have no action. These problems can be a little bit harder for students because they cannot necessarily envision which operation they should be using because they can't visualize what's taking place in the story. The other problem type in this unit, both add-ins unknown, ties really closely to KOA3, which is to decompose numbers less than or equal to 10 into pairs more than one way. Let's look at an example to see how these 2 standards connect. In this problem, Mom has 7 brownies, and the students are asked how many can she put on her circle plate and how many on her square plate. This gives the students the opportunity to be creative and to have more than one answer. They may put 2 on the circle plate and 5 on the square plate, or 3 on the circle plate and 4 on the square plate, etc. But this is really tying into that standard that's having them decompose numbers less than 10 into more than one way. You can also tie your both add-ins unknown problems to KOA4. For any number 1 to 9, find the number that makes 10. If the total number of objects in your story problem is 10, the students are working on decomposing 10 into many ways, which will help them with this standard. It's important, though, to know that students really need to have almost from memory, but maybe not quite from memory, an ability to find the number that adds up to 10. So using both add-in and unknown problems is a great way to develop this skill, but is not specifically addressing the standard. In this standard, they would be needing to do problems that have a missing add-in. For instance, you have 7 cookies and your mom gives you some more. Now you have 10. How many cookies did she give you? These problems can be extremely difficult for students because they have a hard time understanding that word sum or following the action when the second amount isn't given. Another way to address this standard is to play some sort of a game where you have 10 and you hide some. Now they can see how many are left and they have to determine how many were hidden. It's extremely important that students begin to develop this skill and have the ability to visualize how many more are needed to make a 10, because making 10s is one of the most relied on strategies that they will use when developing fluency with their basic addition facts and subtraction facts within 20. Another great way to develop this skill is to use your 10 frame boards and always ask the question, how many do I have? And then how many more do I need to make 10 anytime you display a number on a 10 frame. Speaking of building fluency with basic facts, students in kindergarten are working on fluently adding and subtracting within 5. In Unit 3, they should begin working on the addition of 2 facts as well as their related subtraction facts. It is not expected that students know these facts from memory by the end of kindergarten, but instead that they have a quick and easy strategy that can quickly get them to the solution. Also, it is not recommended that students repetitively practice their basic facts with flashcards, but instead that they have so many repeated experiences with working on how many did I hide, or how many more do I need, or decomposing of numbers, or problem solving with story problems, that they simply come to know these and to build fluency with repeated experiences. KCC7 deals with having students compare 2 numbers between 1 and 10 when presented as written numerals. One thing to note about this standard is that kindergartners are not expected to use the symbols for greater than or less than or the equal sign when comparing numerals. The standard for comparing numbers in first grade specifically mentions the use of these symbols, and that helps us to see that it's not an expectation for kindergartners. In kindergarten, students simply need to look at two numerals and determine which one is greater and which one is less. In the beginning, the written numerals should always be connected to a group of objects. Students should already be experienced with comparing groups of objects based on the Unit 1 standard KCC 6. When comparing groups of objects, the concept of more may seem almost intuitive for students, and though the concept of less is logically related to the concept of more, the word less proves to be more difficult for students than more. A possible explanation is that children have many opportunities to use the word more but have limited exposure to the word less. To help children with the concept of less, frequently pair it with more, and make a conscious effort to ask which is less questions as well as which is more questions. For example, suppose that your class correctly selected the set that has more from the two sets that were given. Immediately follow with which is less. In this way, the concept can be connected with the better known idea, and the term less can become more familiar. When comparing written numerals that are not directly connected to a visual group or set of objects, it's important that students have the ability to visualize the quantity that is attached to these numerals. And therefore, it's important that students have had many opportunities to build numbers using concrete objects and to visualize these numbers with dot cards, Reckon Recs, 10 frames, etc. in order to have that quantity attached to that written numeral. Well, I think that pretty much does it for Unit 3. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you find this helpful as you begin planning your Unit 3 instruction.